I feel like I'm not a really good coach when we've got an agreement to coach every 2 weeks for the next 3 months. So I'm not sure if that's the most useful process. I feel like I can be helpful sometimes when I'm in a conversation with somebody where I'm like, let me just ask you some good questions. And then shut up and I listen to the answer. I'm not scared about being a bit pushy and a bit provocative, but I actually rarely call it coaching. I'm just in conversation with somebody.
Hello, my friends. Anneli here, and I am here today in my new podcast with no other than Michael Bungay Stanier. And we met before, and this is one of my favorite authors all time. And if you follow me, you know that I talk about him all the time. So it's about time to actually invite him to a little bit of a deeper conversation. So welcome, Michael.
Anneli, thank you. I mean, we had fun on one of your Instagram lives some time back, but it's lovely to be back in conversation with you.
Oh, thank you so much. So this is called Branding Unplugged. And what I mean with Branding Unplugged is that I love singing. And when you're singing just with a guitar and not with a band, it's always a little bit more raw and unscripted in a way, and maybe not so edited and not so perfect. So I want this to be perfectly imperfect.
I specialize in screwing things up, so I will absolutely be able to meet the criteria of imperfect. That's going to be easy.
I love that. Okay, so we will talk a little bit about your books because I mentioned you're my favorite author, or at least one of them. And I really mean that because we will go back to your books, but especially two of them actually really changed my life in a way. So I want to tell a little bit about that. But most of all, I'm interested in you as a human being, Michael. So I want to get to know you a little bit better, if that is okay.
That's fine. I'm excited for that.
So would you love just introducing yourself first so people know who you are?
Sure. Now, it's always interesting. I mean, you're talking about branding. So, so when you introduce yourself, you're immediately at a crossroads, which is so what do you talk about? Or what do you not talk about? The typical introduction is, let me tell you all the things I've achieved. Like, here are my medals and here are my honors. I won the bronze medal in the under-9 swimming competition. I'm telling you all the achievements I've had. But I think George Bernard Shaw said, never trust a man's biography if it doesn't talk about defeat and failure. And I always think that that's kind of the more interesting stuff. So the kind of the bare bones of me are, I'm Australian. I'm 56, just turned 56. I live now in Toronto, Canada, and I got to Canada via time in England, where I studied and lived for a while, and then Boston, where I lived for 3 years, and then moved to Toronto 2001. So what is that, 22 years ago, roughly. I'm a writer, so I've written 8 or 9 books, one of which has been a really big hit called The Coaching Habit. A few have been minor hits, and a few have disappeared without trace. But if you're looking for kind of the thumbprints of life on me, kind of the sliding door moments, as they call it, where this happened and not that happened, and it made all the difference. The first thing would be that I grew up in a pretty happy family. Mum and Dad were a really solid couple. Dad was, a contributor as a parent and running a household, not just going out to work and earn money. And I like my 2 brothers. I'm the eldest of 3. So even though I showed up and at a pretty early age was, I want to say, confusing to my parents. Like, I would go up as a 3-year-old in supermarkets and say, hello, my name is Michael and I can hop. Would you like to see me hop? And my parents are like, who is this kid? Because they're both quieter and introverted and a little more shy and a little less kind of give me a spotlight.
Yeah.
And I had some degree of wanting a spotlight. And also I had a wiring that was a little bit around, I will just try stuff out. I will try and be a little bit different. I will go and try and have adventures. And I remember my mum talking to Marcella, my wife, when they first met. And she's like, honestly, Marcella, we spent years waiting for Michael to finally land in a pile of shit and learn his lesson. But he never did. He'd always go, ta-da! So I grew up in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia. Went to high school there, went to university there. And then probably the big sliding door moment was winning a scholarship that took me to England to study. And it did two really significant things. One is it stopped me becoming a lawyer, because I had studied law in Australia. I studied literature as well, and I was good at that. I studied law. I was terrible at that. I was just not, it was boring and I didn't get it. And in fact, I finished law school being sued by one of my law professors for defamation.
Oh my God.
No, it was just like the nail in the coffin, which is like, Michael, you shouldn't be a lawyer. So getting a Rhodes Scholarship took me to England, and it meant that I got off the path of becoming a lawyer. And very quickly, in the first few weeks, I met Marcella and we became a couple. So we've been a couple for 31 years now. And that changed everything, because it meant I didn't go back to Australia. I stayed in England while she finished her PhD. I got my first job in England. And then I guess, another thing with thumbprints on me was that first job. So this is in the mid-90s. And it was a job in a small innovation agency. But nobody really knew what innovation was in the mid-90s. It was kind of a little bit before it had become a thing. And, I tried trying to explain what I was doing to people, and nobody got it. But effectively, we were hired by companies to invent new products and new services to launch. And we weren't that good, at least when I was there. We never really launched anything that was hugely successful. But they were very much about we can't do business as usual. We have to work in an interesting way. So they hired me because I was a bit weird and interesting, and they let me wear my earrings, and I made my own clothes at those days, and I had long hair, and they were like, yeah, you're smart and you're quirky, and we like that. So I mention that because it meant that I think a lot of people, when our first jobs, we have the life, we have compliance injected into us, which is like, here's how you behave when you're working for an organization. Here's what's acceptable. Here's what's not acceptable. And with these guys, I was lucky enough to be in a culture where they're like, we kind of like the weird, rule-breaking, be different side of you. So I didn't have that beaten out of me early on, which is great.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I got curious as to, look, we keep having these great ideas and we come up with interesting product ideas, and then they go back into the organization who hired us and they die. What's going on with that? Why can't we successfully launch anything? And so I got a job as a consultant in the world of organizational development and change, because I wanted to understand how organizations kind of squash initiatives and squash ideas. And that took me from London to Boston. I helped them open up an office in Boston. And, that work was interesting, but it kept becoming clear that I'm just not that good a corporate citizen. I'm like, I'm Michael and I can hop, and I want to run around and hop. Yeah. And I don't want to be I don't want to be in a cubicle. So left the job in Boston, flew up to Toronto. I had a job as a consultant lined up, but the flight out of Boston was scheduled for 9/11. So that, all went wrong. And it meant that when I got to Toronto, the job I had lined up wasn't there anymore, because, everybody was like, what's going on? It was like kind of traumatic time for the world, place of time of uncertainty. And it meant that actually through necessity, really, I started my own business. And that was another key turning point, because I didn't really think of myself as an entrepreneur, as somebody running their own business. It's not, some people become entrepreneurs because they're like, I love the money and I love the build and I love scaling and I love all of that. And I'm like, I like being an entrepreneur because I'm unemployable. Like I'm just like,
And two
nobody
of
wants to
us.
hire me anymore. So after some years faffing about, trying out a bunch of different things, I kind of figured out that I thought coaching was a really powerful technology. And I was irritated by a bunch of things around the coaching profession, the kind of the amount of vague woo-woo-ness of it all. The fact that it was not very diverse, it still is really overly represented by white middle-aged women, and shortly after that, white middle-aged men. And I particularly thought it was a really useful leadership skill in organizations, but it wasn't being taught as a leadership skill. It was being taught as kind of life coaching for managers. And I was like, no manager wants to do life coaching with their people. They want to help get stuff done. So all of that triggered me designing training, and the training became the platform for the Coaching Habit book. The Coaching Habit book has become this big bestseller.
One of my favorites.
Yay! So that's lovely. I love the post-it notes you've got in the book. Thanks for showing that. 4 years ago, I stopped being the CEO at Box of Crayons, the name of this training company, and handed that over to somebody on the team who, luckily for me, is far better at being a CEO than I will ever be. I'm not very good at being a CEO. And nowadays I am still a writer. I still write books. The current business I've got my focus on is more B2C. Box of Crayons is B2B, selling to big companies.
Yeah.
MBS.works is B2C, so it's helping people find their next big thing, be the best version of themselves, unlock their own greatness. And there we go.
I love that.
There's a randomly assorted collection of things about me.
Such an interesting story. We have so much to unpack here. I want to go back. Okay. Can we go back to your childhood first? Because
sure.
I'm really curious about when you said this thing about who is this kid? You want to be in the spotlight. Do you know how you turned out that way? Well, was it like you had this kind of personality, or was it a reaction of you being the eldest kid wanting to a little bit of an attention, or what do you think?
I think it starts with I am fundamentally wired to have a sense of contentment and self-confidence. It's really great.
Wow.
When I write emails, my kind of automatic little sign off is "You're awesome and you're doing great," and people love that.
Yeah.
They write back to me saying thank you for the encouragement, and partly that comes from me. I tried that phrase out once in a training I was running, and people responded really well to it. I was like, I should do that more often. But I was born with the belief that I'm awesome and I'm doing great. And it doesn't, and that's kind of, even in my down times, and I certainly had ups and downs, but that core backbeat doesn't go away.
Who gave you that confidence? Or were it yourself or someone else?
I think I was wired that way. And also I haven't had anything take that away. So I had a family that was pretty supportive of me being who I am and doing my own thing. And, my parents didn't go, right, we've got to squash this because this guy is, weird. They were like, okay, well, we'll let him, we'll do our best to support him and kind of be the wind in his sails. There's also something around, like I'm from an early age, I've also been pretty aware of my strengths and my weaknesses. And like I've got plenty of those. But I've always gone, how do I play to my strengths? And so I do feel that part of the success I've had is one, a degree of self-awareness around what I'm good at. Two, a fundamental belief that I'm awesome and I'm doing great. Even when I screw up, I'm like, yeah, I screwed up, but it's the best I could do. So I'm awesome and I'm doing great. And third is persistence. Like a bunch of things work because I've just been doing it for a while and I've been in the game for a while. And, Woody Allen said 80% of success is just showing up.
Yeah. Okay, let's stay here a little bit because I'm really curious. Did someone tell you that you were awesome? Because it's one thing to be wired a certain way, but did you also get to hear that?
I don't really remember either of my parents going, Michael, you're awesome, because, you're awesome is a very North American thing to be saying. In fact, my mum hates the phrase, you're awesome and you're doing great. Whenever she gets an email from me, she's like, stop saying that. It's not even grammatically correct. You're a Rhodes Scholar, damn it. So she's like, she's not a fan of that. But I think I had, teachers and coaches and parents who were affirming in many, many ways on an ongoing basis.
Because one thing that I think about from childhood is, what is your opinion about if people are not wired the way you were and they're a little bit more insecure? Do you think it's a good idea to help a kid to see what their strengths are, what they're really good at, and encourage them to do more of that, or to also kind of explore a lot of different things, even if it means going into your weaknesses? You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not a parent. I'm happily child-free. So,
Me too.
There's always a danger when you have a random person who doesn't actually have kids start pontificating on how best to raise kids.
And now we're both two
I'm
people,
like,
so it could be.
What do I know? But for human beings in general, there's this dance that happens, which is when you play to your strengths, you get to kind of deepen and grow some kind of core attributes of how you are. But if all you do is do the things where you will win, you get stuck pretty quickly. From a different book I wrote called How to Begin, the core phrase in that is, we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things.
And what do you mean by the hard things?
Well, I guess it's the stuff where you're like, I don't know how to do this. This feels like too much of a leap, too much of a stretch, too much of a gap. So as I say that out loud, Anneli, I'm thinking, well, the hard things are external and the strengths are internal. So there's a way where you go, look, for me to work on accounting, that is a hard thing, but that is definitely not a strength of mine. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But, my team and I have just set a goal for the next decade, and it's to sell 10 million books over the next 10 years. And, it's really hard to sell books.
Yeah.
If you can sell 5,000 copies of a book, you've actually done pretty well. If you can sell 10,000, you've really done well. That's actually that puts you in the top 10% of books sold, probably the top 5% of books sold. If you're selling more than that, you've got a big list. You've made a splash. You got lucky. So selling 10 million books, I'm like, I have no idea how to even go about doing that. But it feels like it is a hard thing that I can use some of my strengths to play to try and give it a good shot. I suspect I will fail at that goal, but it feels like a worthy goal to stretch for.
I like that. So back to your scholarship, because you said you also studied literature. Was that what you got the scholarship in?
So the scholarship meant that I could go to Oxford and study anything I wanted. And so I did a master's degree in modern literature.
So was that when you decided to become an author, or did that come later?
Oh, that came quite a bit later. No, I just like reading books and like stories, and I like writing about it. And so when I won this thing to Oxford, I was like, do I do a new subject and try and start again? I'm not quite sure what I'd want to do. I know it's not law, but I'm not sure other than that what I would do. And in the end, I like studying a master's degree, and I got to write about James Joyce and travel to Ireland and do all sorts of fun things like that. Now, I have a grandmother, my dad's mum, who was an author. She was a writer. She wrote plays and books and poems and newspaper columns. And she was always the grandparent where I felt most kind of connection to. But, it wasn't until I wrote my first book in, I think probably about 2005. So how old am I then? I'm probably, I think I'm close to 40, and I'm some years into starting my company, like 3 or 4 years into starting my own company. And it just felt like this was, I had an idea, and this is a good thing for me to write about. If you'd asked me earlier if I was going to be a writer, I was like, maybe, but it would have probably been fiction, because that's what I read.
Yeah.
I read fiction. But it turns out that I like being a teacher. I mean, when you sum it up, I'm a teacher. And of all the different ways you can teach, writing and writing books is a way that I think I'm particularly different and particularly good compared to other people.
Yeah. Okay, this is a reflection, and I just want to see what it might be, because I'm weird. I define myself as weird, so I'm going to ask a weird question.
Good.
Okay, you're saying that you're weird and quirky. Okay, you're smart and weird, and you do things your way. When it comes to coaching and to writing, I just feel that is things when you really have a lot of patience, both with yourself, takes time, and also with other people. And for being like weird, quirky, and smart, that feels like you're a really fast thinker. How is that like connected with you having patience to coach people, for example?
Well, I don't coach people because I'm too impatient by that appearance. So, when I first started my own business, I really thought I'd be a coach because I'd done crisis counseling as a teenager. So I'd been on a kind of youth suicide hotline, and that really planted the seed for me around supporting people and asking good questions and being present and listening to their answer and considering that perhaps there's more to their answer than they told me. So asking another question to kind of be nosy about it. And so it really felt that when I started my business, 35 or whatever I was like, probably coaching would be the thing. It just seems to make a lot of sense. It feels like my whole life's been building up to this moment where I built a coaching practice, and I built a coaching practice. And I'm like, I like the moments of coaching, but I'm Michael and I'm 3 and I can hop and you want to see me hop. And there's none of that when you're coaching somebody. And so I found it a bit boring and a bit too out of the limelight and a bit, it just didn't play to my strengths. My strengths are, I'm a pretty good coach, and I will have regular ad hoc coaching conversations with people. But the whole business model of having a coach being a coach didn't really work for me.
Okay, so in what kind of situations do you feel like you're a really good coach?
I feel I'm a really good coach. I feel like I'm not a really good coach when we've got an agreement to coach every 2 weeks for the next 3 months.
No.
So I'm like, I'm not sure if that's the most useful process. I feel like I can be helpful sometimes when I'm in a conversation with somebody, often somebody I care about or just somebody I meet, where I'm like, let me just ask you some good questions. Like, I'm a good coach. I ask good questions and then shut up and I listen to the answer. And I'm not scared about being a bit pushy and a bit provocative.
Yeah.
I think those are all good skills. But I actually rarely call it coaching. I'm just in conversation with somebody and I use a different mode of conversation to be supportive to them in a way.
So what's going on in your head when you're that little Michael inside of you, 3 years, want to be in the limelight? What happens when that little kid appears in your head?
I have a portfolio career that allows me to have an outlet for that need. So I have friends who love being on stage all the time, and they're basically professional keynote speakers, and they give 100 or 150 talks per year, and they spend their life going from stage to stage to stage. And I find that as boring as I find coaching somebody. because I'm like, it's just boring. So I need a mix. So my life is writing stuff. I have a podcast of my own, which is a kind of quirky creative project. I have started 2 businesses that other people mostly run for me because I'm not that good at running businesses and I'm a bit bored by that. I do some keynote speaking, so I get the kind of the buzz of an audience and the buzz of performance and that. I'm always dreaming up new ideas and new businesses, so I've got a new idea for a business that I might think about starting in the second half of 2024. I need a mix. I'm not that good at the kind of the singular routine.
Okay, so I can't help but I need to ask this question when I hear you talk about this. Do you have ADHD?
I don't. I've never been diagnosed as having ADHD, and I have a bunch of open loops in my life that I'm aware of. But I've also, I've written 9 books, and so I've also got a track record of finishing a lot of stuff as well. And I don't know enough about ADHD to actually self-diagnose. I've got a bunch of cliches about what that means, and that's probably outdated and incorrect information. But I don't. Nobody's ever mentioned it to me before. It's more a syndrome of overcommitment than ADHD.
I kind of self-diagnosed. Well, I also have friends who kind of diagnosed me. Who knows how to diagnose? But anyway, I just I never felt the urge of really going deeper into it because I know I'm weird and I have my things, but I also kind of like that part of me a lot. So when I find ways how to cope with things, and when I'm really interested, I'm also finishing things, and I do. So,
right.
So I could recognize so many things from myself in you talking about it, but I also see your strength in it. So if it's not in your way, if it's actually a strength.
Right. Pretty much every morning, not every morning, but almost every morning, I do a tiny little bit of journaling to start me off, and I ask 3 questions. I go, first of all, what do I notice? And that, it's like, what am I thinking about? What am I worrying about? What do I notice outside my window? What am I noticing in my body? It's kind of just a kind of moment of being present to what's going on. I then go, what do I want? Which is a really helpful and hard question. It's one of the questions from the coaching habit you'll recognize.
Yeah.
And, I've always said that I think that's the hardest question to answer in the coaching habit. But it kind of keeps going, what am I doing all of this stuff for?
Yeah.
What am I longing for? And is the stuff that I'm doing directed towards easing that longing? Or am I just kind of trapped by my own to-do list?
Yeah.
And then the third question is, what's the one thing today that I need to do? Because, my to-do list is too long. I'm really this year actually trying to go, look, I'm being bossed around by my own to-do list, and it's ridiculous. So what's the one thing helps me self-manage a little bit away from the syndrome I definitely have, which is, I ticked 40 things off my to-do list, but I haven't done the one thing that's actually the important thing to do. So it helps me focus on that.
I like that. Okay, so if we talk about brand for a while and your personal brand, so if we would say that is your professional reputation, what people actually do say about you, do you know what people say about you when you're not in the room?
I have some inclination of what people say. And I've asked the people in my community and on my email list over the years different things like, what am I good at, or when you think about me, what do you think of?
Yeah.
So do you want me to answer that question?
I'm really curious about what do you feel is your people's perception of you?
A brand is a complex thing. When you're defining what a brand is, I'm like, the language I use is a brand is a promise kept. So it's like, what's the thing you consistently keep doing? So you keep making the promise about what you show up and what you do. but it's kind of what you do and what you're known for and how you make people feel. It's that whole kind of complex things and what are the kind of core, more abstract values that you're rooted in. But I help make complex things feel simple and doable for people. So, you could say that the coaching habit and the advice trap, the sister book to that they unweird coaching for a lot of people. A lot of people go, oh, if this is coaching, I can do that.
Yeah.
So behind that is an ongoing ability to have people feel encouraged and empowered. They're like, I think, giving people agency is a big part of it. And then, if that's what I'm doing, the style in which I'm doing it is I'm anti-guru isn't quite right, but I'm relatively grounded and amused by my own success and publicity rather than overly believing it. So I have a sense of humor and I have a quirkiness.
You mentioned quirky and weird several times. Is that words when people would?
It's not actually. I don't think weird or quirky are things that words that people would use for me. So it's interesting that I've said it a few times. But also, I don't think I am mainstream. If you're talking about North America, which is kind of my continent, I am not a classic Midwestern thought leader.
Yeah.
Like, my sense of humor is different. My sense of style is different. My sense of wanting to provoke rather than to reassure is different. So wanting to be, what Seth Godin would call a purple cow.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm more interested in being a purple cow than being a regular cow.
Yeah. Do you feel that people understand you? I mean, would you say that how people perceive your personality is aligned with who you are, your identity?
Yeah, I think so. In other words, I don't feel like I put a mask on when I'm going on to work. I don't feel I put on and here's Michael, in his performance mode. That said, I'm not very big on social media, but, on Instagram and on Twitter, I guess, you have to call it X, but,
Yeah.
We created a little character of me, a little cartoon character. And in part that's because I don't like the relentless performative nature of social media, because I honestly feel like at a certain point I'm now performing the person. I'm putting in a performance of the character known as Michael Bungay Stanier or MBS. And so part of the decision on social media to use this little caricature of me was to say, look, this is social media for me as a way of helping people, teaching people and giving people access to some of the stuff I do. And the character has some of the brand characteristics of me, but I don't have to keep showing up and kind of doing the spotlight thing. That doesn't interest me very much.
Okay, so this is interesting because my first interview was with a design legend called Carlos Segura. He's amazing, and we became friends after that. I really appreciate him so much. And he said something beautiful that it's about being a human being. It's about being and not performing. And I think that is beautiful. And when you talk about this, it's almost like two different people. Okay, this might be a little bit deep, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but you get a little bit of feeling that you're very comfortable about talking about what you do and what you offer, but that may be a little bit more private side of who you are feels like you're not so interested to have in the spotlight. Like, do you feel like you have this more, like, I'm the private Michael at home, and now I'm kind of the author, the consultant, Michael at work?
One of the people I admire in the world is Bob Dylan. And I admire Bob Dylan for the way he manages his brand. Like, we all know the name Bob Dylan. If you ever listen to any of the interviews with Bob Dylan, you can't quite tell what's true and what's not true. He's forever making stuff up. It's quite enigmatic. And I'm like, so I've listened to Bob Dylan for 30 years. I love his music. Do I know what Bob Dylan is like? I've got no real idea, because he's like, he's got a brand persona called Bob Dylan that the musician and performer Bob Dylan puts out there and manages in a way. And I think he doesn't have to work too hard to kind of manage and invent this brand persona. It's not like there's this huge gap, but I think it does protect the nuance of who he is as a human being. And the way I talk about my personal mission in this world is to infect 1 billion people with the possibility virus. And I use that metaphor, first of all, because I had it before we had a COVID pandemic and it wasn't cool to infect people with viruses, but but it's because at the heart of that, infect 1 billion people with the possibility virus is this idea of how do I get out of the way so that the work I put into the world has a chance of spreading.
I see what you mean.
So if somebody in a Swedish company is using some of the questions from the coaching habit, and they've never read the book and they've never heard of the phrase the coaching habit, and they certainly have never heard of my name, that's a success for me. That's the idea spreading without me needing to be centered to that. And so you're right in that there's a dance for me going, I don't want to be central to the work that I put out there for a number of reasons. One is I want the ideas to spread without me.
Yeah.
Secondly, I've already won, so I don't need to take any credit or earn much more money or any of that sort of stuff. Like, I've already won the game.
Yeah.
So I don't have to do that. And secondly, or thirdly, or whatever, just politically, I'm the type of person who is normally in the spotlight because I am a middle-aged, not even middle-aged anymore, late middle-aged, straight, white, overeducated, cis, able-bodied male, right? There are people like me everywhere, and we are all in the spotlight, and we are all in positions of power. And part of the deeper work that I'm trying to do is enable and empower and encourage other people to step into the spotlight. So, part of why I'm really proud of the 2 companies I've started is that they're run by other people. They're run by young women who are doing a brilliant job at doing this. And I like the fact that I have stepped aside and created an opportunity for those people who are not necessarily the type of people invited in to lead companies to do their great work.
Oh, this is amazing. It's something about you that makes me a little bit emotional. I don't know what it is. I think it's because you feel so real and grounded and confident and selfless. And that's really, really so nice to be around people like that.
Thank you. I would say I aspire to all of those, being grounded and confident and selfless. Those are all aspirational things for me.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
I do want to ask you about this book before we get into the new book. So I want to ask you about the coaching habits because this is, like you see, one of my favorite books. This is what I do when I read a book a lot. I think I recommended this to all my students all the time because they say this is like the blueprint for not just coaching, but also for how you sell something and also for strategy.
Right. Absolutely. Because I've been in sales and I've created strategy and I know a bit about strategy. So you can see all of that stuff. Yeah. It's like what's that wonderful book? I've forgotten. It's like about the connected forest. And it's how mycelium kind of connect all these trees together. Yeah. The mother tree is what it's called. That's the name of the book. And I'm like, this is our tree. But there's this underground network that connects it to other trees and other schools of thinking and other things. And I think that's part of the power of the book. And I love that you noticed that.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to hear a little bit about the story, if that is okay, because actually, I want to hear about how this got published. and the story a little bit about that, because I did hear a little bit about it. And I want to see if this is the right story, because when I did hear that story, and I know the result of this book, I literally started to cry because I was so happy for you. Because I heard it after I read it, and I'm like, if someone deserves this, it's him.
Oh, thank you.
So can you please share a little bit about the background of this story?
So this is the third or fourth book that I've written. And I had self-published a book which was called Find Your Great Work. And then that book got picked up by a New York publisher called Workman, a really kind of respected company, and it got republished as Do More Great Work. And it had some good success. It sold about 100,000 copies in the 15 years since.
Isn't that a lot?
So it's pretty good. I would call that a really successful B-list book. If all of my books could sell 100,000 copies, I'd be delighted.
Yeah.
And so I had some success with that. And then I came back to Workman, in part because I had to. It was in my contract that they get first choice of the next book, which, by the way, I would encourage any authors to never have that clause in your contract. I'm like, why would they get first choice of your next book? That if they do a really good job of your first book, then they get to have a bite of the second book. But anyway, so I had this idea. It's for a coaching book. I'd been training this work for a number of years, so it had been tested in the world, and I knew it was useful. And they're like, great, yeah, write the book. So I wrote a book, and they're like, yeah, we don't like that. I was like, but they're like, we like you, so why don't you go and do this? And so I was like, okay. So I went away and I wrote a different version of this book. And I came back and they're like, yeah, we still don't like this. I was like, oh
my God,
so downhearted. And then I went back, and this happened 4 or 5 times. So I literally wrote 4 or 5 completely different versions of the coaching habit. Each one I'm like, okay, let me try and reimagine it and reorganize it and have a different kind of narrative weight or whatever. And this probably went on for 2 or 3 years. And finally I was like, you know what? I've kind of got lost. I'm a rabbit chasing my own tail or something. So I got kind of really clear on what I thought this book should be. Like, it's about simplifying coaching. It's about 7 questions. I think I really see it now. And I was like, okay, enough of the back and the forth. So I went to him, I said, okay, here's the idea of the book. And now it's a kind of take it or leave it. Because I can't keep trying to write the book that you don't even know what it is. You just know what it's not. It's an impossible task. And I was pretty confident they were going to say yes, because, I'd sold 60,000 or 70,000 copies of the book at that stage. So you bet on the man, and I had an email list and all this other stuff. And they turned me down. And I was surprised and gutted, quite frankly. I was like, oh, man. And so I had this moment of going, so what do I do now? Do I just abandon this idea or not? And obviously I went, I licked my wounds for a while. I didn't, the next day go, well, I'll show them. But I kind of went, you know what? I do think there's something here. And also, and this is important for the way I think about books, is I think this book is a way that will support and grow my business. Now, here's an aside. I publish my books through a hybrid publisher. So there are 3 different types of ways of publishing a book. One is you self-publish, which basically, if you can create a PDF, you can self-publish, because you create a PDF and you upload it to Amazon, and then they can do print on demand for you. And you don't have distribution, and you don't have quality control, and there's a limit to what you can do with the design and the look and the feel of the book. But, it's cheap and it's profitable, and there's all sorts of ways of doing that. You can go the traditional route. So you find an agent, the agent pitches your book, you go back and forth, you finally you might get a small advance against future sales, you write the book, you discover the publisher, you're just one of 1,000 authors for them, and they don't care that much about your book. You launch the book, they don't do any marketing for you, you have your heart broken, and your book disappears.
Oh my God.
That's kind of how and you earn about 8% of the cover price, so they take most of the money. And then the hybrid version, which is the one I do with a company called Page 2 in Vancouver, is I pay money up front, and it's not a small number. It's like $40,000 or $50,000. They produce a professional, beautiful looking book. They manage distribution. They manage all the details. I earn roughly 40% of the royalties, so I earn more money. But I get to make the final decision on the title and the cover and the call to action that I want to put in the book and all of that sort of stuff. So I have much more control over it.
Yeah.
And so that's the style I use. So I decided to, with the coaching habit, after I'd been turned down by Workman, I was like, right, I'm going to self-publish this book. But my commitment was to self-publish it as a professional. I'm like, I'm not going to just do the cheap, easy amateur route. I'm going to do it as a professional. So I found an editor and worked with her. And then I did some research and I found a Canadian designer who I thought was great. And so I got in touch with Peter. And Peter had just been hired by Page 2 as their main designer. So that kind of connected me with Page 2. And so we did this hybrid publishing model with Page 2. And of course, the coaching habit became a huge success. It's like sold 1 million and some copies now. It means that, I've been able to use it to grow the business of Box of Crayons. I've also earned roughly 4 times the amount of money that I would have if I'd gone with a regular publisher, or 5 times the amount of money. So it's been much more profitable for me. And, I also get to feel really smug because Workman turned this down, and I had this big hit with it.
Oh my God, I got like goosebumps. It's such a beautiful story. But I mean, how much money did you make?
I'm not totally sure because I'm not great at tracking that. But if I earn somewhere in the region of $5 a book or $6 a book, something like that. And I've sold 1.2 million books. What is that? $7 million.
So you get that.
Now, I have to pay for printing costs and stuff like that, so that's not all profit. But that's somewhere more than 2 or 3 million and less than 5 or 6 million, somewhere in that range.
And we're talking about US dollars?
We're talking about Canadian dollars. So it's like 20% less than US dollars.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. I mean, it has given me financial freedom. And, I still earn about $500,000 a year through that one book selling. And that money goes into supporting my company and stuff. So it's not money that ends up directly in my back pocket, but it's still my money. So it's amazing.
I'm so extremely happy for you.
Yeah.
Oh my
great.
God. Do you really, really deserve it? Thank you so much for sharing that. I am so, because I love this book so much. And
thanks.
But then I also love another book that you've been writing. How to Begin.
Oh, good. That's less coaching and more about how do you find your next big thing? How do you be brave enough to kind of take on a worthy goal, a project that matters to you?
I'm curious, and I want to ask a question that is a little bit maybe selfish, but I will ask it because now I have the opportunity to ask you.
Yeah.
If I read here from the book, it says, this book starts now, right here on the cover. You know why? You know that you have more to contribute. You want to shake things up and make a difference for yourself and for the world. You want to learn and grow. You want to be a force for change. You're ready to begin. Open the book and start doing something that matters. Like, I love that. And when you talk, it feels like you're almost writing like to a personality of yourself, like wanting to do things, want to, make a dent, want to do something. Like, how did you come up with writing this book?
How did I come up with writing this book? I was attempting to write another book. So I'd written The Advice Trap. So The Coaching Habit is the book that kind of shares the 7 questions.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you can ask these 7 questions, you can really shift the way that you lead and you great strategy. Staying curious a little bit longer is a really powerful stance in the world. And then the follow-up book to that was called The Advice Trap, which was a deeper dive into, and why is it so hard to stay curious? Because you've got the list of the 7 questions, and yet here you are giving advice. So it kind of introduces the idea of the advice monster and how do you tame your advice monster. So it's still about coaching, but it's a deeper look about how do you shift your own behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I still was thinking to myself, I haven't really cracked a clear, powerful way of talking about behavior change for individuals. So I started to try and write a book that was tackling that. And I wrote a bunch of words, and I shared it with a few people and went, what do you think of this so far? And they universally hated it. And they were like, that was terrible. My friend Misha was like, I've read 60 pages of this. I don't even know what it's about. And I'm like, you always know that your first draft is not going to be very good, but you hope it's not going to be quite as bad as this first draft was, which was bad. So I kind of went through this draft and I went, is there anything I can save here? Anything that I can recover? And there was just kind of one phrase, which I thought was really good, which is, we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things. I'm like, that is a really good phrase. And, I'm constantly in my own life going, what's the next big thing for me that takes me to the edge of who I am? Because I want to do projects that matter, but I also want to keep growing and evolving, becoming the next best version of who I am. So this is stuff that I use for myself. So I came up with this idea of a worthy goal, and a worthy goal being thrilling, important, and daunting. So these 3 attributes: thrilling, lights you up; important, it serves the world in some way, makes the world a better place; and daunting, meaning it's on the edge of your own sense of self and competence and the like. But unlike some of my other books, I hadn't really tested this stuff in reality. So I spent a year running free workshops online. It was kind of in the heart of COVID, teaching people about this and refining the language and refining the process and testing it out and kind of trying stuff out. So I'm like, okay, I put some thousands of people through this now. I've got a sense of what works and what doesn't. And so, the book's in 3 parts. The first part is, how do you draft a worthy goal? It really builds on an insight from the coaching habit, which is, your first go at it is never the best go. Things get better with drafting. So here's how you more rapidly kind of fine-tune your worthy goal. The second section, which is the most kind of psychologically deep, is, are you really committed to this? Because the key insight about a worthy goal is, it's not just a task you're adding to your to-do list. It's you saying no to some part of who you are in the here and now. It's you disrupting status quo. And there's always a consequence to that. So are you willing to do that, be that disruptive to yourself and to your life and the people around you in pursuit of this worthy goal? And then the third section is around, okay, so if you're saying yes to this, here's how you get started. Here's how you take your first steps.
Yeah. The selfish thing that I wanted to ask is because I can see a pattern in myself, and I don't know if this is how I can figure out if this is avoidance or if it's me just always want new challenges. Because people will tell me that's avoidance all the time, or like, oh, this is when it's getting difficult. But in my head, it's almost the opposite. It's like, I think I kind of figured it out now, and now I'm ready to take the next challenge. And then I'm a little bit bored, and then I need a new thing. So I'm curious, because where I am right now is that because we both are from knowing marketing and branding, and when you want to go into a market, that you want to have a niche, that it's a little bit smaller because you want to build awareness. So I was really focused on brand strategy and creative people. And I left my entire client base, everything that I've been doing for almost 30 years, to focus. And now I've been doing that, entirely that, for 3 years, no client work, focus on coaching and teaching. But I'm a little bit like you. I love teaching, but the coaching part, I love people. I really love them. I love helping them. But I'm also realizing that I'm so good when I can inspire and start up things. And I'm not so good at implementing and being that person side by side for weeks and weeks. I want to go in and out. I want to challenge. I want to be, from knowing me a little bit now from our conversations, and that, what would be your observation? Is it me feeling like, oh, this is getting a little bit difficult now? Or is it more me leaning into my intuition and personality trait? Like, can I ask myself like some difficult questions to know?
It's hard to say. There's always a tension between starting something and scaling something. And I know for me, all the joys in the starting of it. And when it comes to the rigor and the discipline of scaling and growing and building systems and being smart with operations and all that stuff, I'm just not very good at it and not very interested in it. So you have choices. You go, I need to hire people to do that work for me, or I need to go, hey, I've done that project, I'm on to the next thing. And each choice has prizes and punishments. That's one of the concepts from the How to Begin book, which is every choice you make has prizes and punishments. So if you're like, okay, so the strategy, but brand strategy for creatives, it's going fine. It's a viable business. But boy, there's some parts of this that bore me to tears. Like how much of that can you hire to, outsource, cut so you don't do it? How do you invent this to be a business that would be like, this would still give me joy?
Yeah.
Because I've kept all the good bits and I've figured out all the bits that are less good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the prize is like, well, already established business and it can get to grow and scale and I get to do more of the joy. The disadvantage is you have to build systems, you have to hire people, you have to do a bunch of stuff. Or you could go, look, I'm done. I'm on to plan F now, and it's the next shiny object. And you're like, oh, the prize of that is freedom and starting again, and bringing all your brand building strategy into kind of, I get to invent a new brand. That's cool and that's fun. The punishment is that torpedo your own revenue. You've got the startup costs. You are going to screw it up in the first bit because you always screw it up in the first bit because what you thought was the problem wasn't the problem.
Yeah.
So you got some choices. And there's probably a hybrid thing, which is, all right, so start your own side hustle, which is like, all right, what's the other idea? And, can you tinker with it and play with it in a way that doesn't make it it has to either be A or B, but it's like, maybe I can experiment with B. I've got this idea for, it's really a new little business because it's a podcast, newsletter, community thing. For once in my life, I'm not charging into it. I'm going, okay, what's the business and can I do it? And do I have space for this? And how would the money work? I'm actually trying to be a little more thoughtful about building it out. And do I have the time to do this properly? And what would need to be true for me to, this is a question I really love. What needs to be true for this to happen? Because rather than being in the present and going yes or no, you go into the future and go, what happened to me to get to this great place? And is any of that feasible?
I like that. Because I do think there is a hybrid, and that's why I'm trying to keep it very open. Because like you said, I think we're very similar in a lot of ways, but experimenting and do new things is so exciting. So me teaching for 3 years, AI wasn't even a thing. It was like we were in the middle of pandemic and I'm like, you know what? You can't teach people to do strategies for 10 years anymore. Like we didn't have an idea about the pandemic, and then that hit. I think we need to talk about the direction, and then we need to be a little bit more flexible. So that was kind of the idea. I need to change a little bit how I teach it. But then AI just came and it went really fast. And I was like, what I feel right now is, you know what? I'm turning 50 this year, but I haven't done my best work yet. I know I can do a lot more for clients. So my idea is I want to go in there and show how important it is to embrace AI, but embrace being human and bringing imagination and all these things, curiosity that we can bring as human into that and show in a way how important creative thinking is, and that we can't just go into some kind of production. So the idea is to keep teaching, but to say to my people, you know what, things happens, and I want to be in the forefront and leading the way for brand strategy. And in order to teach you the best way, I need to go out there and experiment. It's like I'm the lioness. I'm going out hunting, and then I come back to my pack. And this is me going out hunting, and I need to do it kind of alone and fast, like a vampire. And then I go back and teach. So I want to combine them.
It's a classic lioness-vampire combination. Well, here's the one thought, Anneli, that comes to my mind, which is, I wonder if you have to do it alone. Like, I wonder if there is a client of yours who might pay you a retainer and you go, look, you know AI is coming. You know it's changing everything. You know that you are frozen in the spotlight because you don't know what to do about it. What if I work with you and I help figure the stuff out, and I'm going to bring my strategy and my brand stuff? Your retainer is, covering my costs. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's enough to kind of feel funded and approved, and creates a sort of safety net and also accountability around exploration and something.
I like that.
I don't know. That's a random idea.
I like it. And I also said, because I want to document instead of...
Right.
I'm a little bit tired of creating content out of nothing. I want to document instead of what I'm doing, because there's so much shallow things on social media. I think it's time for people to see the reality. And then I bring my client into teaching. So then I can bring the creatives into the C-suite table and show the reality, how it works,
Yeah.
That's the idea.
So there might be a hybrid way of starting this and building it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm really interested in that. Okay, so over to this again, because I love the questions you asked, because people, when you listen to this, really go back and take notes what Michael said, those questions, because I think this is like a little bit of a disease all creative souls have, that we just want to do new stuff and we want to change and everything. So it's really good to pause a little bit and ask yourself those questions. So thank you for sharing.
Often one of the underutilized drivers of success. Box of Crayons, which in some ways, is a training company that's been around for 20 years, pretty much it has trained one program for 20 years.
Oh.
Now, it's ebbed and it's flowed over that time. We've had more, we've had fewer, but, we don't have a huge suite of stuff. We're teaching you the core stuff that's in the Coaching Habit book so that you can shift your behavior and stay curious longer. And I'm a creative person, but to my surprise, I was I just taught the same workshop for many years, because I'm it's important, and B, this is the key work I'm meant to be doing, and C, if I walk away from this now, there's a lost opportunity. Same with this goal of selling 10 million books over the next 10 years. That's not really creative work, although there's an element of that involved. It's more around, I think my books are good, and I want them to find as many people as possible so the world gets a bit better. And if I'm trying to make the world a bit better, one option is for me to come up with new stuff, but the other is to properly grow and harvest and maintain and manage and curate the stuff that I've already created.
I like that. is there a way, because when I hear you that you've been doing it for so long, it's very impressive. And I'm thinking, when you have people taking care of the operations around and you can kind of go in and do your workshop, because it's still fun to meet people and to teach and have a workshop, is that a way of keeping that alive for so long, to actually not doing the admin stuff and everything around?
Yeah, if I was doing the operations and admin stuff, I just have to kill myself because I'm hopeless. I'm a hopeless and bored. It's a terrible combination. If I was competent and bored, I could probably get away with it, but I'm not even any good at it. I'm just not interested in it. So, it's all of that classic work around, well, what's your genius work and how do you hire to fill the spots that you shouldn't be doing so that you can do more of the stuff that you should be doing?
Okay, this is really good. You might actually have done the third part of my, things in my life that were really important. And the first was to read The Coaching Habit and then how to begin. And this advice might actually have saved me a little bit, because when I get so excited, it can happen that I go on intuition right away, and things can happen. Like I take drastic decisions when I listen to my intuition, and sometimes I regret.
I totally hear the calling of the new thing.
Yeah.
But, I just think this idea of doing a prizes and punishments, which are what are the prizes and punishments of staying as they are? What are the prizes and punishments of the new thing? What are the prizes and punishments of the hybrid thing? Or doing it as a side hustle or building it slowly or whatever it might be. One of the lessons that I've learned over time is things are rarely as urgent as I think they are in the moment. And when I have a new idea, I'm like, this is it. And I have to act immediately. And I've bought 3 URLs and I've done this and I've done that. And I'm like, everybody calm down. I'm 55, 56. I'm like, I've got another 15 years or 20 years of working. I don't have to solve this in the next 3 days.
It's just so exciting when you get that creative urge. Okay, last thing. I can talk to you for hours, but last thing. How to work with almost anyone. That's your new book.
Yes.
And I don't have it here because I'm actually reading it right now. I got it from you, and thank you so much.
My pleasure.
But it's 5 questions for building the best possible relationships. And I want you to talk a little bit about this book, but also because I think this is difficult, because it's really important for me with relationships. Asking questions is really important. But it also took so damn long time for me to feel comfortable with myself, to find my voice, to stand up for who I am and how I want to work. So sometimes I feel like I'm just this super adjustable, flexible person who just asks people how they want it, and then I become what they want. So I'm a little bit curious about how your response to that. So if you want to tell a little bit about the book.
Sure. So the starting insight is at our happiness and our success at work. So not just the work we do and whether it flourishes, but how we feel about ourselves and the work that we do is really influenced by the quality of our working relationships. Like if you're doing great work, but you're doing it with an asshole, it's a miserable experience. And if you're doing mediocre work, but you're doing it with somebody brilliant, it's got a redeeming quality to it.
Yeah.
And in fact, the work actually gets reinvented because you and the brilliant person go, we can do better than this.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like a truth that most people understand. But it's also true that for most of us, we don't actively manage our working relationships. We just kind of hope that they're going to be okay. And we kind of go, these are the cards I got dealt, so I just have to do what I can do with the people I'm working with.
Yeah.
And I think every working relationship can be better. Not everyone, but pretty much everyone can be improved. Whether it's keeping the brilliant ones brilliant longer or just making the bad ones more bearable and more workable and more practical.
Yeah.
I think there's this idea of, okay, so with this person, how do I build a best possible relationship? A relationship that is both safe and vital and repairable. This does not mean, as you were kind of hinting at, Anneli, how do I give everything up so the other person gets what they want? That's not a sustainable or vital meaning full of life for you. That's just boring. That's if you know the drama triangle, which is one of the tools I teach in the Coaching Habit book, which is like, you get stuck in this dysfunction of being a victim or a persecutor or a rescuer. Well, when you're kind of giving it all up so the other person is happy, you're kind of probably dancing in between the victim and the rescuer mode.
Yeah, I'm good at that.
Yeah, exactly. As are many of us. So this is about actually, how do I build adult-to-adult relationships? How you get out of the drama triangle, for at least a while anyway, is trying to build adult-to-adult relationships. I'm like, okay, so how do you do that?
Yeah.
Well, part of it is like, have a conversation. And this is the kind of key tactic in the book. Let's have a conversation about how we work together before we start working together. So, Anneli, you're hiring somebody to run the operational side of your current business. Because you're like, oh man, I can't keep doing this. I need somebody to do it. And you're like, great. And you put out an ad or you reach out to your network and somebody applies. And the first few moments are amazing because they're excited and you're excited. It's the honeymoon period and you're like, whoa. And then somewhere it all goes off the rails, sometimes in a big way, sometimes in a small way. But when you hire this person, you're like, here's all my operation stuff. Go do it. And they're like, give me all your operation stuff because I want to prove that I'm a good hire and I'm valuable and I can impress you. So you just get into the work right away. But what I'm encouraging you to do is sit down with this person and go, hey, how should we work together? So, tell me when you've had a boss or you've had somebody like me in your life and it's been amazing, what happened?
Yeah.
What did you do and what did they do? And now let me tell you my answer to the same question. When I've hired somebody and it's worked really well and they've done a lot of the kind of the operational stuff for me and it's worked really well, this is what happened. This is what I did. This is what they did. And then you go basically, and when it didn't work, tell me about a time when it was a bit mediocre or terrible or whatever. What happened? What did you do? What did they do? And you can tell the same story. And you're setting up this conversation to go, how are we going to do this that gives us both the best chance of success? Because I want you to know what success looks like for me, and I want to know what success looks like for you so that we can both work towards it whilst getting the work done.
This is two of the 5 questions, right? And it's just really important that, like you said, you can ask someone. I think to my point was to also allow to ask yourself and to have that conversation, because otherwise it's all about the other person. And if you're like a people pleaser like me, it's very easy to start adjusting to that and not have your own, what you want.
Yeah. So this is a business book. But it's a business book wrapped around a self-growth, self-development book.
Yeah.
Because it's like, there are 5 questions. There's a keystone conversation, which is my language for have that conversation about how you work together. The keystone conversation has 5 questions. And I'm like, step number 1 is to prepare your own answers. And until you know what you want and how you want to work, it's very hard to ask for that.
Yeah, I would recommend, because I also tried to have companies together with people. It never worked out, sadly. So if you want to partner up with someone, a lot of people want to have a business with someone. You should actually buy this book and start doing this first.
I think of this book as being useful for any of your key working relationships. So that may be your co-founder. It might be your client. It might be somebody on your team.
Yeah.
It might be your boss. It might be a colleague in a different department. It might be your creative director. If you look at people and go, which people influence my success and happiness?
Yeah.
Well, all of those are candidates for you going, hey, let's talk about how we work together. Because if you can improve each one of those relationships 10%, everything changes. Improve them 30%, everything changes.
It's amazing. I love that. When do you know when it's time to leave?
I don't know. The way I think about it is, Anneli, everybody probably has a bias to leaving too soon or leaving too late. Some of us are like, I give up too quickly. Some of us are, I'm too loyal too long. And so it's impossible to say how do you know. What's helpful though is to understand your own bias. Because if you're a person who quits too soon, when you feel that need to quit, it's helpful to go, should I stick it out a little bit longer because my bias is to quit too soon? If you're a person who sticks around too long and you're like, no, I'll just keep going through the mud and the grime, then you're like, is that my bias? Actually, should I be getting out of this now? Because, I've learned a bit about myself that I stick around a bit too soon.
Yeah. It's often connected to some kind of fear.
Yeah. They're both connected to some kind of fear, which is like you stay loyal because you're afraid of what happens if you're not in that relationship. You quit too soon because you're afraid of what happens if you stick around here. I'm going to get hurt or damaged in some way.
Yeah. Okay, last question before we end this. You talk about the 3 different kind of questions, starting with what, how, and why.
Yes.
I couldn't help just thinking about, and I want to say, I am weird. I'm quirky, going back to your description of yourself. I went to a walk with my dog. I was like wondering, I wonder if there are different personality types that are, if you would describe the what, how, and why question with the personality type connected to that word, what would you say I am from knowing me a little bit? Am I the what, how, or why person?
So my bias for those, why questions are often not that helpful in everyday conversation because it's really hard to ask a question why without it sounding a bit accusatory.
Yeah.
And secondly, often you're like, I'm just trying to figure out the details so I can solve the problem. How, and you're, as somebody who's encouraging being more coach-like, I'm like, stop solving other people's problems for them. Allow them to solve problems themselves. How is like, let's get on with it and fix this. How are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And that always assumes that you know what the problem is. And I think how questions often get asked a bit too soon because you want to figure out what the real challenge is. So for me, I'm like, I just have a very strong bias towards the what questions as your default question. So I suspect for many of the creatives, and probably you too, Anneli, the what question is probably the questions that best define how you show up to the world. Because it is the most curious type of question.
I love that. And I aspire every time I think why, I try to rephrase it as a what question instead.
Great. Yeah, great.
But what I also did kind of reflect on was that it's a little bit like, I wish I was a better coach. I wish I was better at asking questions. I wish I was a little bit more patient and sometimes not so challenging. So if I would say what I am from the 3 words, I would say I'm a why person. And the reason is because I want to go a little bit deeper often, and sometimes I feel like it gets a little bit shallow, but I also want to challenge things, and I don't like authorities. So sometimes I want to ask, why is it important to do that? Because don't just tell me what to do. I want to know why. And so I'm a little bit difficult to coach, I think. While some people who are more how are so like, let's just take action and do it and just listen, What's your reflection?
Well, I think you can ask what questions that have the same impact as why questions. If you're like, I'm not just going to do that, make a better case for why I should do that. You can just go, so what's the thinking behind that? What's made it clear that this is the best approach for doing this? What other things have we considered in terms of ways of solving this problem? And it's kind of asking why, but it's asking in a way that's slightly less triggering for people, more likely to kind of engage curiosity rather than defensiveness.
I love that. I think I just get away sometimes with it because I have kind of a friendly voice and I smile a lot. So people they don't feel so offended. So sometimes I can be really like go, ask almost anything with a smile, and people like happily answer it. But
I suspect that's true. I think you can get a charm takes you a long way for sure.
But I will work on my what questions. I really want to.
Excellent.
Okay.
Glad to hear it.
I want to thank you so much. I'm so happy to hear the stories behind your books, because I think that there's a lot of people listening to this who also aspire to be a little bit more of a thought leader, expert in their field.
Yes.
And writing a book is actually a really good idea. I'm planning on writing my first this year.
Good, exciting.
Yeah, I am. I already started like 2 years ago, but because of my lack of focus. But this year is going to be the year.
All right, good for you.
So I will look into the hybrid way of doing that. So, yeah, is there anything else you want to add that I didn't ask you?
I think that was a great conversation, Anneli. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.